Hi everyone, I'm Caleb Dennison, and welcome to the first in a series of videos that will pair the PlayStation 5 with a variety of TVs to see just what kind of gaming experience is possible with this next-gen console. Today we start with the PlayStation 5 mated to the Sony X900H, and folks, there's a lot to talk about, so let's just dive right in. Now ultimately we're going to dig into some of the settings on the PS5 and the TV, take a look at the graphics and talk about the TV's picture performance. But let's start with the elephant in the room, which is that the PlayStation 5 is an elephant-like console in this room. It's big, yes, but also very powerful. I kind of like it standing vertically as we have it here, but I can also see that novelty wearing off in time and ultimately putting it down into its horizontal orientation and trying to squeeze it into my entertainment center. For now, though, I like to see its presence as a reminder of how badass it is. I'm also enjoying the controller quite a bit. It feels good in my hands and the haptic feedback is next level. When you are Miles Morales on a train during the Spider-Man game's opening sequence, you can feel yourself going over the tracks. You can feel the cell phone buzzing your notifications in your hand. It's a lot of fun. Now let's talk about setup. The first thing you need to know is that the PS5 ships with an ultra high-speed HDMI cable. Use it. If you don't use an HDMI certified ultra high-speed cable labeled to handle 4K 120 or 8K 60, then you probably will run into some problems if you're connecting to a modern TV that supports those and other features. Now, I highly recommend connecting directly to your TV, but if you do connect through an AV receiver, first make sure that receiver is also rated to handle 4K 120 or 8K 60, and you'll need another ultra high-speed HDMI cable to patch from the receiver to the TV. I would not connect to a soundbar at this point because that is bound to introduce some latency and it probably can't handle the bandwidth that the PS5 demands. Once you are connected and the PS5 is powered up, pair your controller by plugging into one of the machine's USB ports, get online, install some updates, and follow the on-screen prompts. I've already done all that, but I do want to take a dive into some of the console's video settings. Let's take a quick trip into the PS5's video settings. Go down to Screen and Video under the Settings tab. You'll notice video output information at resolution, transfer rate, HDR and such, all set to automatic, and that's actually done automatically when you set up the PS5. The TV sends information to the console and tells it what it can do. So automatic is a fine setting for the X900H or the Z8H. Going to be a little bit different with other consoles, just as a note. Adjust HDR. Let's go ahead and click that. This is something that happens while you're setting up the console. It'll run you through this. I just wanted to show you what you want to do, and this will be hard for you to see on your screen, but you want to take this little symbol and basically get it to where it's just barely visible. You get 3 slides that you work with here. What this does is it adjusts the peak brightness as well as the shadow detail that you're going to get out of your HDR modes. And you can always come back and adjust this later if you don't like what you're seeing out of your games. One other setting that you'll take care of during the setup process is display area. This is to make sure that you're seeing all the objects on the screen and no extra border. Basically that it is scaled correctly. I've got it done just right here, but you may need to make a change depending on your television. So we've knocked out the PS5's video settings. Let's go into the TV's picture settings. And by the way, if you grab your Sony TV remote and start clicking around, you'll notice that you're controlling the PlayStation 5. So to get into the settings, just click the little cog and then into settings, we'll go down to display and sound, and you'll notice that we are in game mode, and that's because the TV sensed the PlayStation 5 and automatically switched. So we talk about auto low latency mode, maybe the TV doesn't have that, but it automatically goes into the game mode. You'll see that we're in HDR already, and that's because even the PlayStation's user interface is HDR. And if we go down a little bit here, I want to show you under the color that we're in Expert 1 color temperature, which I think is fantastic. Expert 2 is a little bit warmer, but for me, the vibrancy and color temperature that I get from Expert 1 seems to be more in line with what I think the game developers were going for. And plus the fact that that's the default and Sony made it that way gives me some sort of indication that maybe we should just leave it that way. At any rate, the point is that the HDR game mode looks fantastic right out of the box on the X900H. Now, the fact that the PS5 seems to be in HDR all the time had me a little bit concerned. So I loaded up an HD, non-HDR title on Netflix. I'm going to click on the settings, go back into display and sound, and what we're going to find is that we are still in game HDR, which is not optimal. I would prefer to use a cinema setting, and we can certainly switch to that, but again, we're still in HDR because that HDR tag is constant. This is where I think that an auto low latency mode paired with some other Sony software could allow us to have non-HDR Netflix in non-HDR. It's that simple. Right now, we're gonna have to do a little bit of playing around with the settings, and hopefully when we come back with the Z8H, maybe there's a fix for that or a workaround, but for now, know that that's the case. If your HD content doesn't look right, that's because it's being presented in HDR, even though it isn't. Now, you may have heard that the PS5 does not support Dolby Vision, and I've verified this is the truth. I've got a Spears & Munsell 4K Blu-ray here telling me it doesn't support Dolby Vision or HDR10+, just basic HDR, and you'll find the same in Netflix. Dolby Vision, not an option. Now let's take a look at gameplay, graphics, and overall picture quality. We'll start with Spider-Man Miles Morales, and when you first start this game, it'll ask you what kind of graphics mode you want to be in. So let's take a look at that. You've got Fidelity, which is a 30 frames per second mode with graphical features like ray tracing, enhanced lighting, and additional visual effects turned on. Temporal techniques provide an extra high quality picture from a 4K resolution base, and that's the default. Now you can go to performance, which is going to give you 60 frames per second, but it turns off the graphical features like ray tracing, enhanced lighting, and additional visual effects, and it's providing a 4K picture from a lower resolution base. So to me, this seems to indicate that you can either have 30 frames per second, which may not look quite as smooth and may have a little bit of screen tearing in some cases, but you're going to get a full 4K picture with a lot of great lighting and texture features, whereas the 60 frame per second may drop some of that. So I spent a little bit of time flipping back and forth between the fidelity and the performance section, the 30 FPS versus the 60 FPS, and there's no doubt the 60 FPS is much smoother. There are sections here like where the Spider-Man mural in the background stutters a little bit in 30 FPS, but in 60 FPS, it's buttery smooth. The trade-off, though, seems to be really in the HDR and the lighting, as the settings description suggested. Seems like there's a little less sparkle. I'm not sure our camera is going to catch that for you, but there were a couple of areas, very tiny areas, where I saw some active sparkle going on that isn't present when you're in the performance setting. So I think you lose a little bit of visual dazzle, but you gain a bunch of smoothness. So let's talk about the X900H's capabilities now and where they may go into the future, and how the X900H's abilities relate to the PS5 as it comes out of the box. As of now, the TV does allow 4K at 120 Hertz, though presently there's a bit of blur involved. I'm going to try to show you what that looks like in a minute. The good news here is that Sony has told me directly they're going to issue an update which should help eliminate the blur anytime you play a 4K 120 Hertz capable game. When I shot this video, the best Sony could tell me was that that update is coming by December 31st, which unfortunately means that we won't be able to show the clear 120 Hertz 4K gaming until somewhere in the new year. But when that does happen, we'll be sure to do it. Now, there's also the issue of the X900H currently not supporting variable refresh rate or auto low latency mode. First, I'd like to point out that the PlayStation 5 doesn't support VRR yet either. But furthermore, Sony says that VRR would come in a future update, and I have reason to hope that both the console and the TV will be updated around the same time. Okay, now I'm pulling up Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War because it is one of a handful of games that offers 120 Hertz gameplay, and I wanted to look into this talk of reduced resolution or slight blurriness that you get from a Sony TV when going into 120 Hertz situations. Before I get there, I need to mention that it's very important that you ensure the TV has the correct enhanced HDMI setting engaged. To do that, click the settings wheel, go into watching TV, then external inputs, then HDMI signal format, and make sure HDMI 3 or 4, whichever the PS5 is plugged into, are set to enhanced format, not enhanced format Dolby Vision. The TV should get this right automatically, but just double check. Next, in the PS5, you might want to make sure performance mode is turned on as the default. To do that, click Settings, Saved Data Game App Setting, down to Game Presets, and then select Performance Mode. Now we're in Cold War, and if we open Game Settings, we can see 120 Hertz is enabled. Well, we can sort of see, because from the screen, there's this annoying bright light in the background, which is ridiculous. Anyway, going into the game, just the intro here, the motion is buttery smooth. Still a tiny bit of blur, but that's the TV, not the game. And the main subjects are perfectly crisp. 120 hertz, good stuff. Now, we're gonna go through these steps to go back into resolution mode on the PS5, restart the console, go back into Black Ops, verify 120 hertz is disabled in the settings, and it is. We go back into the game, same beginning part of the game, and what I notice is that the lighting is better. The HDR highlights are clearly brighter. The motion isn't quite as smooth, but it isn't bad at all. What I'm not seeing though is a bunch of blur or reduced resolution. I understand it can happen, but Sony says the fix is coming, so I'm really not worried about that. What I do see here is a clear need to make some trade-offs on the PlayStation 5 side of things. We saw it in Spider-Man Miles Morales, where the choice was higher FPS or better image quality. Again, same thing here in Call of Duty. With higher frame rate comes a slight hit to image quality. I presume this is due to varying bandwidth limitations of TVs and whatever bandwidth capabilities there are with the PS5. The safe bet is to trade off data-intensive high frame rates for image quality. For a cinematic game, I'll probably go image quality. For a first-person shooter, I might go with higher frame rate. The takeaway for me is that on the short term, this is already a huge step up in gaming experience from what we got with the PlayStation 4 and its games. From the user interface to the color, the detail, the highlights, and the gameplay, it's already excellent. In the near future, it will get even better. And in the long term, there is so much unlocked potential here. So much so that when game developers start tapping that potential, I think the TVs are going to be ready to handle it as well. For now, this is a killer combination with little improvements right around the corner.